These are your four candidates.
I especially want to thank everybody for coming today.
What I've been hearing over and over and over again is that there is one issue in this particular election that resonates across all spectrums, and that issue is the one that I've been talking about. That issue is the economy. People want us to continue on the path of growth and jobs. What lifts people out of poverty is opportunity. When I was growing up on the border, Saskatchewan was always a have-not province. It had smaller houses, it had run-down cars, it had old farm equipment in the fields, it had pump jacks shut in or barely moving. And right across the street in Alberta, you had pump jacks going up and down and nice ranch houses and new cars. And I thought, what is the difference here? You know, does the oil stop at the border? Does the rain not come down in Saskatchewan? The difference, folks, is public policy.
We're not talking about the next government of Canada. We're talking about who can best speak to what Calgarians need from an MP now.
Calgary right now provides a lot of money to the rest of Canada. And the most curious thing is that we have the only transit system that doesn't get any money from the federal government to build lines. It can only be explained by the city being taken for granted by the federal government. So Waterloo got funding for its rail lines. Ottawa got $600 million of funding for its rail lines. Calgary got zero funding for its rail lines.
CBC does some good programming, as long as they're still funding some porn channel on the web. There are going to be people that are going to look at CBC and say there's still room for cuts.
I wanted to wear the Liberal colors to have us all question very clearly whether our identity as Calgarians is so linked to brand loyalty to that blue, no matter what that blue does, no matter what it says, no matter how many times Rob Anders is reelected, that we are actually different than that we Calgarians are actually progressive people. That's why I'm running on those values of being fiscally prudent, socially progressive, and environmentally responsible.
The future of Calgary is under attack by the opposition parties. And the Conservative Party is the only party that has been defending our energy industry, defending the sustainable development of our energy industry.
We know this industry is going to be a critical part of Canada's energy future for many, many years to come. But it will only be able to thrive if it is working under regulatory certainty. Right now, the federal government has not defined what it means by the industry's growth, has not defined what it means by our national interest when it comes to the oil and gas sector. And because of that lack of clarity, because of that lack of leadership, we are finding project to project to project that we're running into all of these challenges. It is absolutely, a dereliction of duty that the federal government is not telling the oil and gas industry, here are the parameters, now go and thrive. They are not part of the conversation internationally, which is why outrageous things have been said about Alberta's oil industry, sometimes at home and particularly abroad, because we don't have a credible voice there. As a Green MP, I would be able to tap into a network of Green MPs sitting in parliaments all over the world and change that conversation and really represent Calgary's interests and Canada's interests and tell the true story of what's happening in our oil and gas sector.
Our largest trading partner in the U.S. is a basket case financially, and we need to start looking for other markets. And that's why we're out doing trade deals in 66 countries around the world right now.
Leader Bob Ray here, all the leadership candidates are coming through Calgary to support my campaign because every Liberal in the country, I have 5 Atlantic Caucus members here tonight to campaign for me. Every Liberal in Canada wants Calgary at the head table of rebuilding a viable alternative to a party that thinks the world is about money, money alone.
Now, the places that have reduced poverty have done so by doing things, not by not doing things. And I want to be very clear what I mean by that. Conservative governments will tell you that not doing things is the answer, that inaction is the way forward for our communities. As long as we don't have taxes, we'll be okay. Let me tell you that the places that have the lowest poverty rates in Canada and around the world think that is absurd, because they fixed the problem by doing things, by taking action. A national transit strategy, a national housing strategy, daycare.
A $20 billion carbon tax, which is what you would get with the opposition parties, would again devastate Alberta's economy to buying your groceries.
Perhaps we should invest a little more wisely than, say, the F-35s. I bet our servicemen and women would prefer airplanes with engines. And so that's what we need to be talking about, the conversation. Also, let us not forget that the Veterans Ombudsman was unceremoniously fired under the Stephen Harper Prime Ministership. And that was an individual whose job it was to represent veterans, to ensure they get the benefits they deserve.
The Conservative government is the party that has been standing out for them. I know that I was swamped on Remembrance Day when I went to the services at the Military Museum, and people knew that I was the Conservative candidate, and the servicemen came over and were shaking my hand and thanking us for our support.
And I spoke to a young man, he said, you know, I'm a conservative, so I don't know, you might be wasting your breath. When he was over in Afghanistan, the equipment was actually often subpar. And part of the reason that equipment might be subpar is, as has been mentioned, we are wasting money on fighter jets we don't need. And I say that as the son of a Canadian fighter pilot, when what we should be doing is making sure that the troops we do put in harm's way now have everything they need to succeed and survive and come home and thrive.
So our economic recovery is still fragile, and I think that that's something that we all want to be aware of. We've seen oil prices recently drop to $86 a barrel. This is a time when we have to make sure that we keep focused on moving our city and our economy forward.
You know, Jim Flaherty came out with a report yesterday that drastically changed the economic outlook for Canada. I'm surprised Joan didn't bring it up, because she talked about economic numbers that came far before those ones. Right now, the NDP is the official opposition. We are the most likely party to beat the Conservatives in 2015. This by-election is sending a message to Stephen Harper from his own backyard. You can't tell us mistruths all the time. You can't hide information in 400-page bills. You can't put out press releases at midnight on a Friday night. You can't make up numbers like $30 billion carbon tax.
I know the other parties would love to have a Calgary seat because that would help them. We know that we can speak freely about what Calgary needs right now when we get to Ottawa, because we are not joining an agenda that's already been defined. The opportunity by voting Green, and it's the reason why I'm running Green, is to actually have a say in developing an agenda, in evolving a party, in finding a voice that truly speaks to what Calgary Centre needs right this instant. Not in 2015, the next time we go to a general election, but right now.
This is a horse race to the finish. Joan or I are going to win this thing. I implore you, join us.
On November 26th, you go and vote. On November 27th, the government of Canada will still be Conservative government. The official opposition will still be NDP, and the Liberals will have 35 or 36 seats in the House, one or the other. But the option before you is that you could have the second Green MP in Canadian history from Calgary Centre. Think what a story that is. Doesn't that tie into an energy that we've already built here? Doesn't that say, hey, take a look at us much more closely. There's a lot more to Calgary than meets the eye. This is a much more interesting and diverse and exciting city than you think it is. And we are open to all conversations and ready to lead.
The first one is Harvey Locke, Liberal Party of Canada. Harvey was born and raised in Calgary. He has an arts and law degree from the University of Calgary. Harvey has practiced law in Calgary for the past 14, well, not recently, but some 14 years. And he's worked as a conservationist, writer, and photographer around the world. Next to him is Chris Turner, Green Party of Canada. Chris's father served the military as a fighter pilot. So Chris grew up on bases across Canada and around the world. He holds degrees in history from Queen's University and journalism degree from Ryerson University. Chris is an award-winning author. The book called Geography of Hope, plus another. And Chris is a regular contributor to some major publications. He resides in downtown Calgary with his wife and 2 children. We have Dan Meades, New Democrat Party of Canada. Dan was born and raised in St. John's, Newfoundland. He has gained international experience working on agricultural projects in Africa. He's also helped develop HIV/AIDS clinics run by local communities in that country. Dawn has ties to Vibrant Communities Calgary, an organization that works collaboratively to address the root cause of poverty in Calgary. And then on the last seat is Joan Crockatt, Conservative Party of Canada. Joan was born and raised in Lloydminster, Alberta, Saskatchewan. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Saskatchewan. She was awarded the Southern Fellowship at the University of Toronto. Joan is an award-winning political and business journalist with over 20 years experience. For the past decade, she has been an independent communications consultant. These are your 4 candidates.
Hi, I'm Harvey Locke. I'm very pleased to be with the East Village Community Association today. I've spent a lot of time in the East Village during this campaign and various towers meeting with folks. I want to share with you how I see the world and how I see this election. As somebody who's from here, I've seen a lot of change in our city. When I was a kid, Chinook Centre was the southern limit of Calgary. This city has changed a lot. And I think the election is about whether or not we've changed enough to have political diversity in our city. Have we come to the point where not every single member of Parliament needs to be conservative? And I think we have. I'd like to explain to you how I see the world. I see the world this way, that the environment is a context for all human life and all life in the world. And inside that is society and culture, where humans live. And inside that is the economy. When you see the world that way, you're saying that we need to work in an integrated manner across issues. And that's why my campaign has been based on a set of values. And those values are being fiscally prudent, socially progressive, and environmentally responsible at home and abroad. Je pense que c'est important pour nous à Calgary de participer au niveau national avec un groupe de valeurs très claires qui peuvent nous distinguer comme des progressistes au Canada, mais avec une perspective uniquement de nous, celui de l'entrepreneur. We are entrepreneurial people in Calgary. We are also progressive people. So if you're an entrepreneurial progressive, you see the world a little differently than a progressive might from another city. So in this city, if somebody wants to get something done, they just start doing it, and then they look for the money to help support it. In other cities, people say, where's the government program? We look for the government program after we started something. That's a special character of Calgary. I want that character to be part of what it is to define who a progressive is in Canada nationally. And the values that I'm running on came from a consultation I led as part of the rebuilding of the Liberal Party of Canada nationally. So I led a process where people told me who they were and their values. Tell me who you are. Was with all the elected members of caucus, all the defeated candidates from the last election, all the senators, and 600 members of the rank and file of the Liberal Party of Canada. And I said, who are you? What do you believe in? And out of that came those values. We are fiscally prudent, socially progressive, and environmentally responsible at home and abroad. I know those are widely shared values by Liberals across the country. You will have seen Liberal leader after caucus member come through Calgary this election to support me, because the Liberal Party of Canada wants Calgary to take a seat at the head table of rebuilding the party and competing for the 2015 election, so that we have a choice, not a choice between the extreme right-wing Harper Conservatives and the left-wing format of Thomas Mulcair, which are both parties that have mobilized their bases extremely well, but are not looking for a way to build an inclusive society that's based on those progressive values. We need choices in this election next time, and we can start in Calgary building a progressive alternative choice with Calgary's values at the head table. I'm really excited about this. My family's 6 generations of building this part of the world. A great uncle of mine helped facilitate the treaty that led to the city of Calgary being able to be built. My grandmother was a public health nurse in the east end of Calgary during the Depression, handing out condoms to prostitutes to keep the VD levels down. My father was the first prosthodontist in Western Canada, which is dentures and bridges. My mother has been a great builder of this city and community. Now I'm hoping that I can serve you all as your member of Parliament and show that Calgary is full of progressive people who are entrepreneurial and who are proud to be Canadian. Je vous remercie. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Turner. I am the Green Party candidate in this by-election. Thank you very much to the East Village Community Association for putting on this forum, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come down here and show that Calgary is ready, more than ready, hungry for a real conversation about democracy in this by-election. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how it is I came to run, and then a little bit about what I think this election can do for Calgarians, and then we'll get on with it. To begin with, you heard off the top, I grew up a base brat all over Canada. I started my career as a journalist in Toronto, as you have to in certain kinds of journalism if you want to sort of make your way. And I began with a real passion for environmental issues. And what I found, though, was the stories that I was telling all sort of had the same theme. And it was a theme of decline and exhaustion. It was, a theme of loss, and a theme there was a lot of, guilt and recrimination involved. And I got really tired of telling those stories. And I moved out to Calgary, and I found a city that was so full of hope and optimism. And I found myself, we got dug in here in downtown Calgary. My first child was born, and I thought, I need to tell different kinds of stories. For her, for this young city that I love, I need to start telling stories about hope and optimism, about sustainability, about the direction we need to go in, not the direction in the past that may have had some problems with it. And the thing I discovered when you start telling those kinds of stories is that suddenly everyone's in the room. I've written 2 books on this subject, 2 best-selling books, both of which covered the sort of global state-of-the-art in sustainability, looking at basically how do we solve the major challenges of the 21st century. And this has become my great passion, is to find great stories and shine a spotlight on them and say to people, let's do more of this. Isn't this great? Let's do more of this. And this summer, when this by-election was coming up, I got kind of called on my rhetoric. I'd been saying to people, hey, let's do more of this. I'd even actually gotten involved at the civic level in politics. I co-founded an organization called Civic Camp, along with Mayor Nenshi and a number of others, in order to change the conversation at City Hall on a couple of issues that I thought were important to Calgarians. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. I think City Hall's got some really great voices in it now. And now what I'd like to do is take that conversation to Ottawa. And that's really what happened. Was I was sort of called on my arguments. You've got some great ideas. You've found some great solutions. Will you run and bring the second Green MP in Canadian history to Calgary Centre? And I thought that was a pretty tall order. But then I gave it a bit more thought, and I realized, you know what? This is Calgary's moment. We're ready for this. This city has an energy in it. This city has an excitement and a sense of possibility and a sense of ambition and optimism that cannot be represented by just one party. This city is ready for much more diversity in its politics. This city is ready for new voices that can really speak to what's happening in Calgary now. We don't have a very good partner for cities in Ottawa. We've got a government that really takes Calgary for granted, doesn't pay its share of all kinds of critical infrastructure as our city grows, doesn't recognize that cities are the economic engines of the 21st century, and they need to be taken care of. They need a real partner that understands the priorities of the cities. Beyond that, they are missing one of the great intellectual resources of our time in this fantastic urban idea lab that is Calgary. I think this city is ready to lead. I think the national spotlight is on us, and what we really need now is to take some of this great idea, this idea factory we built here, and take it to Ottawa. And that's really why I'm running. It's a by-election. We're not talking about the next government of Canada. We're talking about who can best speak to what Calgarians need from an MP now. And that's really what I'm excited to be able to do, is change some conversations that need changing. This being Calgary, of course, one of the most important conversations is about energy. And really, we're having an incredibly immature conversation about energy in Parliament. We've got cheerleading and on both sides, a whole lot of noise and shouting, and not a lot of light. Really, I think that we've lost a big chunk of that conversation and a lot of our credibility internationally on this conversation because we haven't stepped up and led at the governmental level. And I think the opportunity as a Green MP from Calgary to really kind of provide some balance to that conversation and really split the difference between the critics and the cheerleaders for industry would be a fantastic message for Calgary to send to the whole country and the whole world. We are ready to lead. We are not afraid of the changes that are coming at us. And we see an opportunity here to become truly the world's global energy capital, not just in conventional resources, but in all of our different energy sources, and really build that low carbon economy that we know we are going to need, that our grandchildren are going to need when we're long gone. And that's really why I'm running, is to change this conversation, bring a real voice that is not going to have to, recite talking points and vote in a block. I will be able to make the Green Party a true representation of what Calgary is today. I'm ecstatic at that opportunity, and I hope you will join me in making history yet again, surprising the country by sending a Green MP to Ottawa. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thank you all for coming today. My name is Dan Meades. I'm the ADP candidate here in this riding, and it's an honor to be in that position. I especially want to thank everybody for coming today. Calgary is an amazing place. We are the fastest growing city in Canada. What that means is that we're constantly changing and growing. We have people from all over Canada and around the world coming here. And I have to say, we're doing an amazingly good job of living together. And what that means is that as our city changes, so does the way we think about it. The values that our citizens represent change as well. And we see the work that's being done on the ground every day. If you walk around this neighborhood, if you walk around Calgary Centre, you'll see homeless shelters doing homelessness work. You'll see agencies trying to reduce poverty, people that care about domestic violence and teen birth rates. These are the things that are happening on the ground in our communities every day. I know about them. I know about them because for the last 3.5 years, I've been the executive director of Vibrant Communities Calgary. In that role, we've been working with government, with business, with people living in poverty, as well as with the nonprofit sector, to try to decrease the number of people we have living in poverty in Canada, and right here in Calgary Centre. It's a hard job, but we've been doing it. There's much left to do, but we've had some success. Part of the reason that it's difficult is because we haven't had any help. The citizens of Calgary are working hard to get this done, but the federal government isn't living up to its responsibility. The federal government has downloaded responsibilities onto our provinces and then onto our municipalities that come with no funding. And so those of us that have been doing the work every day look to the federal government and we're surprised. We're surprised because we don't know what they stand for. We're surprised because we know what they're against and it's easy to say no to things. But we don't know what the federal government is for, what they're in favor of. They haven't answered to their record. You know, this federal government ran on transparency. None of us knew what they meant is that their candidates would be invisible. And so they said they would reform the Senate. By reform the Senate, they meant continue stacking it with conservatives. They said we would have a transparent budget process. And by transparent, they meant 2 bills of 420 pages apiece. Within there was nothing to do with the budget in many cases. Changes to our Navigable Waters Act, things that we care deeply about. And so instead of the federal government supporting the work of our communities, it has stopped. It hides information from us. The next in CNF deal, we don't know why they haven't made a decision. They've pushed it off until after the byelection. We have a candidate here today who represents that party. There are thousands of Calgarians' jobs on the line in that CNF-Nixon deal. And I know today we're going to hear what the decision is and why it's been put off again and again when those jobs are right here in Calgary Centre. A little about myself before I close. This is what I care about. I am passionate about making the world a better place. You know, the most powerful day in my life was when I got up and realized that the people that held the structures in place that hold our communities back, they were no better in any way than any of us are. They're no more powerful, they're no smarter. That the world is ours to change if we choose to. I know in Calgary we haven't always chosen to change the world. And that's because our lives here are pretty good, but not for all of us. And so today I ask you to be brave and to act with courage. We can change the world, but it takes a change on election day. It takes a change in the way we want to see ourselves and the way the rest of the country sees us. I'm Dave Meades, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about what that change looks like and get your vote for November 26th. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you. I hope this is working. There you go. I wanted to thank Susan Cooper and the East Village Community Association for putting on the debate today, because I know how much organization these events kind of take. And I know how much work it takes to be able to get all of us up here on stage at the same time. So thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for coming here today. So I'm Joan Crockatt, and I'm running to be your Conservative candidate in the by-election here, as you know, in Calgary Centre. So my husband Peter and I have lived in this riding for 17 years. And we decided to move here and raise our children here because we I really believe, that this riding offers the best opportunity in Canada as a place to live. And it's because we want to keep that opportunity going that I'm running as your Member of Parliament today. And deciding where you're going to live is one of the most important decisions. And I think most of us have come to Calgary simply because of the opportunity that this city provides, with its entrepreneurial spirit, with its hard work, with its low taxes, and yes, with its conservative governments. So clearly, the future of Calgary is under attack by the opposition parties. And the Conservative Party is the only party that has been defending our energy industry, defending the sustainable development of our energy industry. And our party, the Conservative Party, is also the party that's keeping our economy going. It's no mean feat when we see that we've been in a global recession since 2008, when we have countries like Italy and Greece and Spain and Portugal that are in bankruptcy, when our biggest trading partner is having difficulties, and Canada has the best economy of the G7, the best economy of the top economies in the world. So that is no mean feat, and that's because we have a Conservative government that's keeping a strong hand on the economy and keeping it going, while still keeping our streets safe, yes, keeping our taxes low, and supporting small business, which is the generator of our economy. So our economic recovery is still fragile, and I think that that's something that we all want to be aware of. We've seen oil prices recently drop to $86 a barrel. This is a time when we have to make sure that we keep focused on moving our city and our economy forward. So all those people that are concerned about our seniors, about health care, about education, those important social programs, you know what? Without a healthy economy, we don't have money to pay for those programs. So a good economy enables all of us, no matter what our economic circumstances are, to be able to enjoy the quality of life that we have here in Calgary. So folks, since joining this Conservative race, I've been out every day door knocking, visiting with people, talking with them, having those conversations, and engaging them one-on-one at their doorsteps. And you know what they're telling me? What I've been hearing over and over and over again is that there is one issue in this particular election that resonates across all spectrums, and that issue is the one that I've been talking about. That issue is the economy. People want us to continue on the path of growth and jobs. And they do want us to stand up for a sustainable and responsible energy development. And as an award-winning energy report
reporter, and I've also covered environmental issues for years. I am the person that can do that for you. It's critical that we keep this industry moving forward in order to maintain our quality of life. It's also paying a lot of the bills for Canada, as we know. So we're developing here in Calgary some of the strongest environmental technologies on the planet, and that's a great thing. And we need a strong spokesperson on the national stage to be able to stand up for our city, our industry, and our country. I am that person. I've been a spokesperson on the national stage for the last 10 years, on all the major networks, yes, on CBC, and on CTV, and on Global and Sun TV. And I will be your spokesperson in Ottawa, in the government, bringing your voice to our Parliament. That's the best thing that you can do to ensure that Calgary does have a voice in Ottawa. So thank you very much for coming. I appreciate the chance to have you all here. I look forward to all of your questions.
Thank you, candidates, for your introductions.
Excuse me, Doug.
Yes.
Is there a time limit on
Yes,
this?
3 minutes for the candidate that is, the question is directed to, 2 minutes for each candidate. The question is, while most Canadians and Calgarians enjoy a decent lifestyle in the country, poverty, of course, has remained constant from 8 to 13% over the past 3 decades. Do you and your party accept this figure? If not, what, if anything, would you do to reduce or eliminate poverty?
Thank you for the question. It is, of course, right in the core of who I am and the work I do. You know, when I left university, I went to work in West Africa for United Nations projects that help folks that are subsistence farmers transition away from subsistence farming into a more economically viable model to feed their families. For the last 3.5 years, I've been here in Calgary as the Director of Vibrant Communities Calgary, and traveling the country and the world, talking about how we reduce poverty in our communities. There are a few things that we need to keep in mind as we talk about this. There are places in this country that have made specific choices, and those choices have led to a marked decrease in the number of people living in poverty. Those are places that have provincial poverty reduction strategies and think of poverty as a complex problem with a complex solution. The federal government, since Harper's first election, and even before that under the Liberals, has done nothing to change the nature of poverty in this country. The question said that poverty hasn't changed from between 8 and 13%. That's untrue, because today the poverty rate is significantly higher than 13%. Most would say about 16.5%. Here in Calgary, we're at 15% poverty. That's 150,000 people here in this city living in poverty today. Now, the places that have reduced poverty have done so by doing things, not by not doing things. And I want to be very clear what I mean by that. Conservative governments will tell you that not doing things is the answer, that inaction is the way forward for our communities. As long as we don't have taxes, we'll be okay. Let me tell you that the places that have the lowest poverty rates in Canada and around the world think that is absurd, because they fixed the problem by doing things, by taking action. A national transit strategy, a national housing strategy, daycare. You know, in Alberta today, we have the highest wage gap in the country, 68 cents on the dollar. The rest of the country is 83 cents on the dollar. What that means is that women in Alberta make less than men in Alberta, and make less than men anywhere else in the country. These are the types of things that result from governments that stand up and say, we won't do anything. Lower taxes is all we need. And so how would we fix poverty? How would we end poverty? We would do so together by working with the government, the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, and people living in poverty to create solutions that would make their lives easier and decrease the number of people living in poverty in our communities. So I assure you, when we talk about social programs, when we talk about making our communities stronger, better, and safer for all of us, the answer is never to do nothing. We've seen it tried, and we know the outcome. Thank you.
Dan has devoted significant effort to reducing poverty in Calgary, and I'd like to thank you for that. It's an important presentation. Mike's not on. There are two basic ways to see the world. Bill Clinton said it beautifully at the Democrat Convention. We're all in this together, or you're on your own. I'm a liberal because I believe we're all in this together. And when we have poverty, we are not only failing the poor, we are failing ourselves. We have to work on this issue. We have to make a commitment to people to create what I consider a rock-solid social safety net. If we want to get people out of poverty, and we do, we need first-class health care. We need first-class free public education. We need to look at school nutrition programs because well-fed children do well in life. We need to look at creating a system where everyone can thrive and no one falls off the cliff. Now, I'm an entrepreneurial progressive because I don't believe we should engage in social leveling where we don't allow people to excel and do better if through their initiative and risk-taking they do better economically. But to believe in individual initiative and hard work and success does not mean that you let people fall off the bus and say, tough luck for them, it's their own damn fault. That's why I'm a liberal and not a conservative. Thank you.
You know, when you run as a Green candidate, as I've learned, you get to surprise people a lot. There's a lot of misconceptions about the party, about its platform. And so when you mention that there are things in the platform that go far beyond environmental and energy issues, people are pretty surprised. They had no idea. For example, the Green Party has been calling for a national affordable housing strategy, which would guarantee that as our society grows and prospers, we make sure that there are plenty of places for people to live at all income levels. That's in there. People are a little surprised to learn that. I noticed today, just today, in the National Post, Andrew Coyne wrote a very interesting piece talking about guaranteed annual income and how that would actually be a much better mechanism for lifting people out of poverty because it doesn't punish you as soon as you sort of stop relying on welfare and move into the job market. You still maintain that sort of base level of being taken care of. And I think it would probably surprise a lot of people to find that the Green Party and Andrew Coyne are pretty much in agreement that this is a very interesting idea worth looking into. So really, you should take a look at our platform. It's a pretty broad and a pretty interesting one. Beyond that, though, when we talk about poverty, I don't think we can talk about it in isolation. And that's why I'm really running on a campaign of putting cities first. When we talk about building sustainable cities, we mean cities that are sustainable for everyone. We mean cities with adequate transit. We know that if you give people adequate transit, they can draw on a much wider job market. You can increase employment by better funding transit. We also know that when you make cities livable and walkable, then you free people from the obligation of owning a car and allow them to meet their daily needs, without having to have this huge economic burden of automobile ownership. That's another reason why sustainable cities, starting with the urban fabric, is a great way to solve a whole bunch of problems. It's the main reason why I put it front and center in my campaign. And beyond that, we know that a government that adequately funds cities is going to generate the 21st century knowledge economy jobs that we know we need to attract and retain here in Calgary. To treat your cities better is to treat the economy better, fundamentally, and that's why we really need to talk about what Calgary needs right now in this election. Thank you.
It was said in the opening that I grew up in Lloydminster. Lloydminster is a very interesting study, and I think it's relevant here today because growing up in Lloydminster, I saw the difference between an NDP government in Saskatchewan and a conservative government in Alberta. And you want to talk about what lifts people out of poverty? What lifts people out of poverty is opportunity. When I was growing up on the border, Saskatchewan was always a have-not province. It had smaller houses, it had run-down cars, it had old farm equipment in the fields, it had pump jacks shut in or barely moving. And right across the street in Alberta, you had pump jacks going up and down and nice ranch houses and new cars. And I thought, what is the difference here? You know, does the oil stop at the border? Does the rain not come down in Saskatchewan? The difference, folks, is public policy. Public policy that gives people opportunity matters. And when Brad Wall came in and he instituted policies that were business friendly with low taxes, guess what happened? The quality of life in Saskatchewan rose, the opportunity rose, the level of people were lifted out of poverty, and Saskatchewan stopped being a have-not province and is now a have province. And a lot of the kids economic refugees who had moved to other provinces, came back home to Saskatchewan. You want to talk about lifting people out of poverty, give them a job. If they want opportunity.
Thank you. Chris, how do you respond to the concerns of the oil and gas industry in Calgary in general, and the chronic takeover of Nexen in particular?
Well, I'm not only glad that question got asked, I'm glad it got directed at me. I'll tell you how I responded to that. It's exactly the same way I responded yesterday morning in the Petroleum Club in a room full of oil and gas. We know this industry is going to be a critical part of Canada's energy future for many, many years to come. But it will only be able to thrive if it is working under regulatory certainty. Right now, the federal government has not defined what it means by the industry's growth, has not defined what it means by our national interest when it comes to the oil and gas sector. And because of that lack of clarity, because of that lack of leadership, we are finding project to project to project that we're running into all of these challenges, where we're seeing more and more that we're losing credibility internationally because we haven't clarified what we mean by good stewardship. We haven't clarified what we mean by sustainable resource development. And in that lack of definition, we are losing a critical conversation for Alberta's future and for Canada's future. It is absolutely, a dereliction of duty that the federal government is not telling the oil and gas industry, here are the parameters, now go and thrive. And I think that's what we really need, and that's why we so desperately need a new voice in Parliament right now for Calgary, so that someone can go and say, you know what, we need to start this conversation over. We need to stop the yelling and the shouting in Parliament, and we need to talk collectively about where we want to go, how we want to develop this resource, and how we begin to move to that sustainable resource future we know we need to get to with a much more diversified energy economy. We are not going to do it simply by cheerleading. The problem with cheerleading is the cheerleaders keep singing the same tunes even when the team starts losing. And I think that's really what started to happen for the oil and gas industry. They are not part of the conversation internationally, which is why outrageous things have been said about Alberta's oil industry, sometimes at home and particularly abroad, because we don't have a credible voice there. As a Green MP, I would be able to tap into a network of Green MPs sitting in parliaments all over the world and change that conversation and really represent Calgary's interests and Canada's interests and tell the true story of what's happening in our oil and gas sector. I think we see the exact same thing when it comes to the Nexen deal. In and of itself, it looks like a fairly straightforward foreign direct investment deal. A lot of people look at that and say, what's the big deal? But at the very same moment that's being considered, the federal government tables this Canada-China investment treaty with no discussion at all in Parliament, no transparency about what that 30-year deal means. And in the absence of any kind of clarity and leadership, we are left to just sort of guess at what it means for Chinook and Nexen. So really, what should have been a fairly straightforward business deal here in Calgary is now mired in this much wider conversation, all of it due to a complete lack of leadership on the part of the federal government when it comes to the oil and gas sector. You do not need another cheerleader in Ottawa. You need someone who can talk to all sides honestly and fairly. Thanks.
I think that we need to get a few facts straight. First of all, the FIFA deal is the first deal is actually a trade deal that the Conservative government is bringing to be debated in Canada in Parliament, which has not been done by any of our predecessors. So that's kind of the groundbreaking thing. As far as the CNOC deal, what I've been hearing from people across Calgary, and as you know, this is among the most well-educated city in the world as far as these deals, is they appreciate the fact that the federal government is open for business, that Canada is open for business, that our largest trading partner in the U.S. is a basket case financially, and we need to start looking for other markets. And that's why we're out doing trade deals in 66 countries around the world right now. We want trade and investment from China and India. The Prime Minister was in India last week.
That said, not every single deal may go forward. We have to investigate them and make sure there's a net benefit to Canada. And I think that that's exactly what Canadians are seeing here from our federal government. That's the responsible course of action to take. And there won't be one size fits all, because different foreign investment deals and offers will have different things attached to them. It's different if you're dealing with a state-owned enterprise or if you're dealing with a company that's not a state-owned enterprise. So they've given the CNOOC-Nexen deal, I think it is till December the 10th, to really evaluate it and make sure that there is a net benefit to Canada. And I think all Canadians will be able to be satisfied that that deal has been given a thorough review before a final decision is made, and I think that's what we want.
What Joan just said is on December 10th, you'll be told whether the CNOOC deal is a yes or no. Do anybody in the audience have the wildest idea of on what basis that decision will be made?
National interest.
National interest, and that is defined as whatever Mr. Harper says it is. That is the problem that we have. We are entitled as Canadians to know what the public policy of Canada is in broad daylight, not decisions made on December 10th. There's no question that we need to engage with China. It is the emerging superpower of the 21st century. And that country to the south of us remains the dominant superpower of this century. It is not a basket case, it is our closest neighbor. We need to think about our role in the world in engaging these big, important countries. And we need to do it in public. We need to do it together. We need to describe what relationship we want with these two superpowers. And yes, we need to debate them in the open. We had an election over the last free trade deal with the United States. We have had no discussion in a meaningful way about the FIFA deal with China. And I'm sorry, a trade deal with Costa Rica and a trade deal with China are different things.
I find it interesting that Joan started her answer suggesting that we should get our facts straight. Because given her answer on poverty, it seems that we have no interest in letting the facts get in the way of a good story. It's true. You made it sound as though the poverty rates in Saskatchewan suddenly plummeted once they voted Conservative. That's the exact opposite of what happened. In fact, it does also suggest that here, after 40 years of Conservative rule, we should have the lowest poverty rates in the country. And that isn't the case either, Joe. And so these are the facts, not a story. Myself and Peter Julian stood in front of the Nexen building last week. We stood there and said plainly and clearly that the NDP is against the CNOOC-Nexen deal. I want to say it again. I know it's jarring to hear a party make a decision, especially with the Conservatives in office, but the NDP are against the CNOOC-Nexen deal. We're against that because we don't want to sell off our resources to other governments. We want to make sure a couple of things happen. Number one, Albertans benefit from Albertan resources. Selling off our resource base to a foreign government doesn't do that. The bigger issue is, of course, what are they hiding? What are the Conservatives hiding when they're unwilling to make a simple decision during a by-election with thousands of jobs riding on this, in this riding? So we have thousands of jobs riding on it right here at Calgary Centre. The Conservative candidate can't seem to tell us how they're going to make the decision. I was hoping when she showed herself, she would stand on the record of the Conservative government. I'm sad to see that's not happening. So the answer to the question, against the CNOOC-Nexen deal for all the right reasons and for the facts instead of a story.
Last year, when we went to the polls, Stephen Harper government promised to maintain funding to the CBC. Once re-elected, the CBC budget was cut by $150 million. If elected, will you be willing to champion the House of Commons Commons Heritage Committee recommendation to increase CBC funding to at least half of the average invested in public broadcasting by other democratic countries. If not in favor of this, would you be in favor of eliminating funding to CBC?
The CBC question. So full disclosure, I have worked for CBC for quite a lot over the last 10 years. I've been a commentator on Power Politics with Evan Solomon for the last 2 years and on many CBC shows over the course of time. CBC does some good programming. That said, whenever you've got a monopoly and it's funded by government, you've got to look at everything that they're spending money on. And in the same way as we want to get rid of the deficit in Canada, CBC is going to be subject to some of that same scrutiny. And so we can't say the CBC is going to be immune from any cutbacks. I think they do provide some good programming. I think there are areas that they need to look at, as long as they're still funding some porn channel on the web. There are going to be people that are going to look at CBC and say there's still room for cuts. So I think in answer to the question that CBC does provide some valuable programming, but I think along with other areas of government, if we're seeking to balance the budget, and we are, CBC is also going to have to share in some of that.
So I bet there's a bunch of CBC employees that just got really excited to hear they were making porn. No kidding. The CBC is a public broadcaster, and part of what we need in a democracy is a free press. I'm not sure what Joan meant by a monopoly. It would suggest that we only have one network in Canada, when earlier she told us that she'd been on all of the networks. And so there must be more than one. CBC is at the heart of what it means to be Canadian. And of course, the NDP would increase funding to the CBC. But the more important thing here is the lies peddled by the Harper Conservatives. We promise to not cut CBC until we have a majority. And then look out. And that's exactly what happened. We had federal candidates from right here in the city say that they would never cut funding to CBC, and then they were elected and did exactly that. It is just one of the many times Canadians have been told one thing, and the Conservative government have done something completely different. I would like to ask Joan, and the next time you get the microphone, tell us that. Tell us why it's okay for a government to say one thing when they're running for office, do another when elected. And when you say you'll do whatever Stephen Harper asks, how can we trust anything you say? Because he's telling us. You can promise anything, but we know you can't trust it.
The irony, of course, is that the CBC was a Canadian broadcasting corporation created by Conservative Prime Minister Harvey Bennett from Calgary. Said Conservative Prime Minister Harvey Bennett created the CBC so that we could have a broadcaster in the national interest. But remember, I talked about the difference in how we see the world. The economy is the center of the universe, and the humans serve the economy. Or society and culture are the context for life, and the economy serves it. The CBC is a great example of those two different worldviews. The CBC helps define us as Canadians. In English, or avec Radio-Canada en français. That's an investment in ourselves. It allows us to know each other. Pure private broadcasting would not allow us to know each other in the same way because it would be based on our own tastes that we've already developed. Public broadcasting tells us things we don't know already. We don't know we have a taste for things. Do you remember Lister Sinclair and ideas? You learned ideas from the CBC. That's why we need to fund it well. And I have to say this, when I hear there's an unhealthy government monopoly that needs scrutiny, I would say that's the members of Parliament from Calgary Centre. We need some diversity in Parliament too.
Prior to running for office, I was a writer, journalist, speaker, and a little bit of a broadcaster. So like Joan, I too have on occasion been paid to speak on the CBC, on both TV and radio networks. I've had my books promoted and reached thousands of readers I never would have reached because of CBC publicity. Like every single other person I know who works in the media and creative industries in Canada, I have benefited directly and substantially from a well-funded national broadcaster. Does a handful of things that are so vital to the arts and culture of this country that no commercial broadcaster would ever do them. That's why we have that vital network. It reaches communities that none of the commercial broadcasters would go into. It provides a platform for emerging Canadian artists to reach an audience that no other commercial broadcaster will allow. It is how we have built a single culture out of a very, very wide and diverse country spread across a vast geographic area. It is a vital piece of a much larger arts and culture picture that the Harper government fundamentally does not seem to understand and respect. And it's no surprise to hear outright falsehoods about what's on the CBC from someone running under a conservative ticket, because obviously they don't pay enough attention to it to know how valuable it is. Thanks.
Can you define what democracy means to you? If you become an MP, how would you promote that democracy?
Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. It's always imperfect, but it's absolutely essential that we respect it. And one of the most amazing things about running as a member of Parliament, when you've had success in the world and done interesting things with your life, is that every one of you is my boss. And every one of you gets to make an individual decision of whether I'm worthy of working for you or not. Only in democracies do you get that choice. You get to decide whether I'm worthy of hiring on November 26th. And it is incredibly humbling. And we have to go and work so hard to get your confidence. That's why I've tried at least to tell you in my written materials and my talk what my values are, where I come from, what I believe. My brochure, which is available to everyone, it's online and hopefully you've all received it. If you haven't, we'll give you one. Tells you exactly what I think about the issues that are dominant issues in Calgary according to public research, because I think I owe you that. And I owe you a chance to know my worldview, which is what I started with. And if you agree with my worldview, I promise you I will serve that worldview faithfully, honorably, and to the best of my ability. Thank you.
This question is an incredibly important one. And it does cut to the heart of why I've chosen to stand as your candidate, as your Green candidate in this by-election. And why, in particular, I'm the Green candidate in this by-election. I hadn't seen anything particularly inspiring happen in Parliament in a very long time. For years and years, what we saw was a lot of shouting, a lot of entrenched positions that were, pounded back and forth like bludgeons to try and, beat the other side of the aisle into submission. And extraordinarily little in the way of actual open governance in the public interest for Canadians. And then something amazing happened this spring. The Harper government tabled an omnibus budget bill that was unbelievably reckless in its approach to Canada's natural heritage. Staggering that they would rewrite the Fisheries Act in the budget bill, that they would erase an enormous amount of our environmental stewardship programs and basic science research in a budget bill. And the reason we know that happened is because one MP, able to speak freely in the Commons, Elizabeth May, wrote 300 amendments to that bill and made sure that Canadians knew exactly what they were getting in that bill. That was the moment that I decided she needs my help. If she asks, I'll join her. Because we need more voices like that in Parliament. We don't need more whip votes. We need an actual voice who will stand up and show Canadians what's happening in that House, respect the institution, and bring it back to a place that actually represents our values. Thanks.
Our democracy is broken. Not because I say so, but because we have a federal government that's been held in contempt of Parliament without recourse. We have a federal government that is under review for elections fraud without recourse. And I will tell you what democracy means to me. It means the true free flow of ideas and then allowing the people of our country to determine what direction we should be headed in, depending on that discussion of ideas. So here's what that means in practical terms for me. In the House of Commons, the NDP, as the official opposition, asks 26 questions a day in question period. The first thing that we need to change in the House of Commons is that we must demand that the Speaker enforce the rule that parliamentarians cannot read off of a sheet of paper in the House. What that would do, well, a few things. We might understand what some of the Conservative members of Parliament actually think, instead of understanding how well they can read what somebody else thinks. The first step. That has to lead into a fundamental review of our democratic process. I'm talking about proportional representation. We all know that the first past the process is no longer a mixed proportional representation system. Right now, the NDP is the only party in the House that has front and center in their platform that we will investigate and review our democracy with the goal of moving towards a proportional representation system so that everybody's vote matters. So, no more book club in the House of Commons, and let's talk about making sure everybody's vote matters. Thank you.
Of course, democracy matters, and I think that's why all of us are here, because we have an opportunity in Canada to participate in an election and in a by-election, and we get a chance to ask our issues, we get a chance to see what the candidates think. And I'm going to read you a number. 10,740. That's how many homes I have knocked on the doors of in this election campaign. And that's what democracy is about. It's about your politicians getting out there in front of you, one-on-one, and giving you an opportunity to tell them what you think. How would they know how to represent you in Ottawa if they were elected with their one question that they might get every 14 days if they're on the opposition benches, unless they were out there talking to you? So if you elect me on November 26th, and I hope that you do, and I humbly ask for your vote, you'll be getting somebody who has more than likely knocked on your door, or someone that you know in this election campaign. Someone who has made a career of talking to people as a journalist. Someone who has represented Calgary's issues and covered them every day at the Calgary Herald. And someone that you know will speak to you and be interested in listening to you. That's what democracy is, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Next question is on federal transfer payments. These fulfill a constitutional requirement where less prosperous governments are given funds to provide their residents with public services that are reasonably comparable to those in other provinces. For Alberta to be one of Canada's major contributors to equalization, we must have improved sustainable transportation. As our representative in Ottawa, what are your views on federal transportation funding for Calgary and Alberta to all candidates? Who would like to go first? Sure. Yeah.
I'm going first only because the microphone was in front of me. And also because in the last 3.5 years, Vibrant Communities Calgary has worked tirelessly to make transit more affordable for the most vulnerable people in our communities. There's something called the Low-Income Transit Pass here in Calgary, which means folks that are living especially deep in poverty are able to ride transit for less than half price. And so there's no doubt that I understand the importance of a municipal transit strategy. You know, Olivia Chow has a bill in the House right now that proposes a national transit strategy. That's an NDP initiative that recognizes the importance of funding transportation in our municipalities. So when we talk about transfer payments, there will be a conversation had, no doubt, in a few moments around how Alberta should be able to only benefit from its resources, and those other have-not provinces shouldn't receive transfer payments. We are a confederation. We are a country. We are in this together. And I think transfer payments, while the formula is archaic, and very few of us could ever understand how the number was actually reached, transfer payments are very important. And as it relates to municipal infrastructure, when we talk about vulnerable populations, when you ask them what's the number one thing that could happen to you to make your life better, transportation is one of the very first things that come up. Thank you.
Transfer payments in transit are Transfer payments and transit are particularly important because Calgary right now provides a lot of money to the rest of Canada. And the most curious thing is that we have the only transit system that doesn't get any money from the federal government to build lines. It's a very curious anomaly. It can only be explained by the city being taken for granted by the federal government. So Waterloo got funding for its rail lines. Ottawa got $600 million of funding for its rail lines. Calgary got zero funding for its rail lines. Do you see a pattern? It is wholly right and proper that we prosperous Albertans share our wealth with the rest of the country. It is also wholly right and proper that when it comes time for transit infrastructure, we Calgarians get a share of the money too. That's only fair. And it isn't happening with this government.
If we're talking about transfer payments, one of the things that people might be interested to know is something that I thought the federal government was very courageous about in the last budget, which is that they increased health care funding to all of the provinces by 6%, going out for 6 years, so another 4 years actually from now. And that money was a greater increase than any individual province provided to health care. And those of you who know your constitution will know that who's responsible for health care? The provinces are, yeah. So not only did the federal government show leadership there, so almost all you hear about is always the cutbacks that you hear about, but you never hear where are they putting the money. The money is going to health care and to the largest increase in old age security that has been given to seniors in 25 years. So that's where some of the money is going from Ottawa. Now, as far as transfer payments to the provinces, yes, there's always the argument that Alberta pays more into Confederation than it gets back. And I think that there's some validity to that argument, and it's something that we're going to be discussing. So you're right, equalization is an absolutely huge topic. There are apparently 13 people in all of Canada that fully understand equalization. It is so complex. But the formula does need to be rejigged, and the Harper Conservatives have committed to taking a look at equalization to make sure there is a fairer distribution of the tax dollars, which incidentally don't come from the government, the provincial government to the federal government. They come through the taxes that you and I pay when our economy is doing well. And that's why Albertans pay more into Confederation, because our economy is doing well. But I think it is a discussion that we are going to need to have. And I know it's a discussion the Alberta government wants to have, and a lot of Canadians think. And you know, and students are saying, well, why is tuition so much cheaper for students in Quebec when we're paying more here in Alberta? So some of those questions are going to be on the table, and I will fight hard for Alberta to get a fair share and a fair deal on equalization.
Just like to say, first of all, that it is not courageous of the Government of Canada to properly provide services that it is obliged to provide. The very least they can do. To come to the question of transit, what I'll tell you is a number of years ago, as a journalist, I started looking into the emerging climate and energy problems that we were seeing, the really, really big picture problems of the 21st century. And I started out talking about a lot of environmental issues and big picture climate stuff, and kept coming back to cities and how cities work and how you take care of cities so that they can function. And what winds up happening, if you look seriously at what's happening around the world to make cities great and to make them livable and sustainable, is that you wind up talking a lot about transit and a lot about trains. And I will fully acknowledge Olivia Chow has shown magnificent leadership on this issue in Parliament. I welcome the opportunity to join her in lending my voice to that call for a national transit strategy, as Elizabeth May also did. That's just the beginning. We really need to take care of our cities, give them the infrastructure they need to thrive in the 21st century. We are falling behind on this. We've neglected them for far too long. If you look at the per capita spending by governments on infrastructure, they have created a $250 billion infrastructure deficit in this country. $250 billion just in the stuff we know we need, not the stuff we actually need to lead. Just to give it one example, I think if we were really serious about sustainable transportation in the 21st century, we would be breaking ground now on a high-speed rail line from Calgary to Edmonton. Give people the option of getting on a train in the middle of downtown Calgary and then arriving in Edmonton an hour later, they'll take it. It's a fantastic way to travel. It brings economic opportunity the entire length of the line. One of the things you've seen everywhere we've done high-speed rail is that all those cities that get stops in between, Red Deer's a great example, also prosper from the fact that they are suddenly much closer to the economic engines of their region. This is the kind of leadership we need on transportation. And not only do we not have leadership and vision on this portfolio, we don't even have a strategy. The federal government isn't even talking about cities and what they need at this point. What they're actually doing is promising things and not delivering. That's true of transit here in Calgary. That's true of recreation centers all over this city where the money was guaranteed, earmarked specifically for that, and then not delivered. This is why we need a voice in Parliament that is actually willing to break party ranks and say what we actually think, particularly when it comes to this government and the way it neglects cities. And that's why I would really like to take a message about what Calgary needs right now to Ottawa on November 26th.
So many personnel were deployed at home and abroad in recent years that there were very few people left to train new personnel and retrain veterans. Equipment deteriorated, soldiers suffered, their families unraveled, and key personnel began to leave in droves. Too few personnel stretched too far. Sick leave associated with burnout and post-traumatic stress disorder. Reduction in resources and programs for those that require medical and professional care, and problems with pensions. Why is the Canadian government still falling short in regards to its support for the Canadian military?
I think, first of all, most Canadians, and I know all military individuals, realize that the Conservative government is the party that has been standing up for them. I know that I was swamped on Remembrance Day when I went to the services at the Military Museum, and people knew that I was the Conservative candidate, and the servicemen came over and were shaking my hand and thanking us for our support. Can we do more? Absolutely, we can do more. And I think that's why the Conservatives announced in the week before Remembrance Day additional funding to help. I think you're all aware of the Helmets to Hard Hats program that's helping our vets get retrained so they can get jobs in the construction industry when they come home. And they've also increased the funding just recently for transitioning, for psychological counseling and that kind of thing. I think that we do have a new situation now with a lot of new veterans that we're seeing come back. But the Canadian government under the Conservatives is very supportive of our men and women in uniform and will continue to be. And I am very supportive of our men and women in uniform. In fact, my dad was a veteran. I've got my cousins, I guess you're my nephew, was in the military, who's here today. And a great many people in our family have been. We appreciate what the military has done, and the Conservatives will stand by you.
There are a few ways to support troops, I think. One of them would be to getting back to Canada's real calling on the international stage, which is around peacemaking and peacekeeping. If we really want to protect our troops, let's stop putting them in harm's way carelessly. Also, perhaps we should invest a little more wisely than, say, the F-35s. I bet our servicemen and women would prefer airplanes with engines. And so that's what we need to be talking about, the conversation. Also, let us not forget that the Veterans Ombudsman was unceremoniously fired under the Stephen Harper Prime Ministership. And that was an individual whose job it was to represent veterans, to ensure they get the benefits they deserve. And so when we hear that this government cares about our men and women in uniform, we need to ask, what have they done that shows that? Because it isn't the bungling of F-35 procurement. It isn't abandoning peacemaking and peacekeeping. And it isn't firing the ombudsman whose job it is to make sure they're treated fairly.
Well, the question of how we treat who dedicated their life to military service is one that's particularly dear to me. I grew up on military bases. My father was a career fighter pilot in the Canadian Air Force. My mother worked as a family counselor on military bases. So I know it very well, and I know the kind of support that they need. To give it a kind of symbolic opening number, though, $28 million. $28 million is what it has cost the government of Canada to grandstand on the anniversary of the War of 1812. That's the cost of that particular line item in the budget. It was $28 million so that we all felt real good about the War of 1812. At the same time, the government could not find $5 million a year to properly fund last rites in order to give every single Canadian veteran a decent burial. But doesn't really like the soldiers all that much. And you know what, I was actually just yesterday, I was at Mount Royal campus and I was meeting students and I spoke to a young man. He said, you know, I'm a conservative, so I don't know, you might be wasting your breath. And we got to talking, and it turns out he's a soldier and he was back studying. And one of the things he mentioned was when he was over in Afghanistan, the equipment was actually often subpar. And part of the reason that equipment might be subpar is, as has been mentioned, we are wasting money on fighter jets we don't need. And I say that as the son of a Canadian fighter pilot, when what we should be doing is making sure that the troops we do put in harm's way now have everything they need to succeed and survive and come home and prosper. That's what's actually initially for our soldiers. Not extraordinarily expensive, fancy line items that were procured in a process that no one involved thought made any kind of sense. That's the kind of non-leadership we have right now. I'd be happy to speak to these things on your behalf and on behalf of all Canadian servicemen when I get to Ottawa.
I think that we have a very special responsibility to veterans. My dad served overseas. My grandfather served overseas. In my grandfather's case, it was real tough on him. He was a World War I veteran from the trenches, and he lived with the ghosts of that his whole life. And we need an attitude that people who serve in the military, especially in conflict, get very special treatment. We need to focus on mental health questions. We need to focus on their material well-being, because I am so deeply grateful that I didn't get the experience my grandfather had or my dad did. And the guys and women who go overseas now, we really need to take care of out of respect for the sacrifice they make.
Why are you running in this constituency? And what are the plans of the Liberal Party of Canada to once again allow them to again become a viable alternative to the Conservative and Liberal parties?
I like that question. Well, I have been involved in politics since 1989 when I ran as a Liberal in Calgary Foothills, and from 1995 to 97 when I was president of the Alberta Liberal Party. And I always said that if I ever had the opportunity to run in Calgary Centre, this would be the place I'd run federally. Why is that? Because I'm a Liberal, and I'm a Calgarian by birth. My family's been here for 6 generations. And I believe Calgarians are progressive people. And I wanted to wear the Liberal colors to have us all question very clearly whether our identity as Calgarians is so linked to brand loyalty to that blue, no matter what that blue does, no matter what it says, no matter how many times Rob Anders is reelected, that we are actually different than that. That we Calgarians are actually progressive people. That's why I'm running on those values of being fiscally prudent, socially progressive, and environmentally responsible. Because I'm inviting every Calgarian of every stripe to consider whether or not that describes them. And the Liberal Party of Canada embraces those values, and I led the process with Liberals from across the country that embraced those values as part of my contribution to rebuilding the Liberal Party of Canada. And you will have seen this week, Leader Bob Ray here, all the leadership candidates are coming through Calgary to support my campaign, because every Liberal in the country, I have 5 Atlantic Caucus members here tonight to campaign for me. Every Liberal in Canada wants Calgary at the head table of rebuilding a viable alternative to a party that thinks the world is about money, money alone, and about new cars when the question's about poverty. That's why I'm running.
I just have to say that I do think it takes a lot of moxie to run under the Liberal banner in Alberta. The party that devastated this province's economy is the reason why no Liberal has been elected in this province since. I think we have to remember, folks, too, that this is the party that's proposing a $20 billion carbon tax, which the NDP are as well. The Greens are a party that's never met a program that they didn't cost. And, you know, the high-speed rail being a particular one, because there was an urban cities, smart urban cities agenda conference here only about 2 weeks ago. And they were talking about the Greens' lovely project for high-speed rail, which I'd love to see how they could cost when we're already running a deficit that we're trying to get rid of and a debt, so we're not leaving it for our children. They said there's only 2 high-speed rail lines in the world that make economic sense, and that's Osaka, Tokyo, and Paris-Lyon. And we're a long way from having the kind of population base that could support high-speed rail here. So we have to look at policies that are going to be feasible for our folks. And a $20 billion carbon tax, which is what you would get with the opposition parties, would again devastate Alberta's economy and also raise the price of everything that you buy, from putting gasoline in your car to buying your groceries. So what we are hearing from people at the doors, and I believe that all Calgarians want, is a strong, stable, conservative government, and someone, the West is in now, you need a representative in Ottawa that's going to be in the government, that's going to have the ear of ministers, and be able to make decisions that count for Calgary.
The Honourable Kent here is here. I bet he was surprised to hear that no Liberal had been elected here in 40 years. Once again, not letting the facts get in the way of a nice story. The truth is, we have an opportunity in Calgary Centre to define our own future. We have a candidate for the Conservatives who has said very openly, and with what I assume she meant as pride, saying that what she would like to do is whatever the Prime Minister tells her. She'd happily be a backbencher. And then when we hear her today on the stage, suggesting that instead she wants to go fight for you, I'm not sure which one of those things we should believe. You know, the NDP is the largest, strongest, most effective opposition the Stephen Harper government has ever seen. In fact, we are the largest, strongest, most effective opposition in the history of Canadian Parliament. And what we're asking here is to add one more person to that official opposition, so that when candidates stand up and when politicians stand up in the House of Commons and tell us things that are flatly, categorically untrue, we have the opportunity to tell the electorate about it. Thank you.
So I understand the question quite clearly. Why run as a Green and why in Calgary Centre? I'm running in Calgary Centre because I live in downtown Calgary and because I've been a part of an extraordinary political energy that has been generated in this city over the last few years that has defied expectations and broken patterns of voting again and again, and I think it's time to take that energy to the federal level. That's the number one reason why I'm running in Calgary Centre. The number two reason I'm running in Calgary Centre is I think there's an opportunity in this by-election to talk about what Calgary needs right now. I'm going to talk about what Calgary can do for government. I know the other parties would love to have a Calgary seat because that would help them. But the Green Party isn't looking for another seat because it'll help them. They're looking for another seat because they know they can represent the values that Calgary has right now. We know that we can speak freely about what Calgary needs right now when we get to Ottawa because we are not joining an agenda that's already been defined. The opportunity by voting Green, and it's the reason why I'm running Green, is to actually actually have a say in developing an agenda, in evolving a party, in finding a voice that truly speaks to what Calgary Centre needs right this instant. Not in 2015, the next time we go to a general election, but right now. This is the question I want every single one of you to think about when it comes time to vote. Which candidate can you count on in this by-election to put Calgarians ahead of party politics? I think if you ask that question honestly, you'll find that the Green Party candidate, who will not be subject to whip votes and talking points, is your best option.
So, not that I mind, but those responses kind of sound a little bit like closing remarks from all of you. I'm going to ask one more question. It will be the last question. Today in the Herald, Lisa Corbella wrote an art editorial about the International Energy Agency predicting that by the year 2017, the U.S. will become the world's top oil producer. And perhaps, in a number of years later, a net exporter of oil. The U.S. is Canada's largest customer. If our largest business account slows down or stops relying on our resources, how does your party plan to address these shifting demands while maintaining a healthy economy in Alberta for all Canadians?
The United States is our largest trading partner, but by trading exclusively with the United States already, even before this International Energy Agency prediction, we take a discount on the price of the oil and gas that we ship, especially the oil to the United States. This means that we have to do something to open up markets to Asia. We need to have a conversation with British Columbia and the federal government about how we're going to do that. Asia is the growth area that we need access to for our stuff. We just plainly do. The way you do that is not by demolishing the environmental laws and trying to force things down people's throats. You do that by having conversation in the national interest, addressing the environmental issues that are associated with the production and the transport and the risk associated with that, open conversations about sharing benefits, and exploring how, in the national interest of Canada, we can get our product to market to get a fair price for it. This also will include liquefied natural gas. We need to explore that as adults, and we need to look at the integrated effect on our economy where we can add value here before we transport and export things. We should not automatically be assuming we're exporting untreated raw materials. We have to have an integrated social conversation about what we're trying to achieve. I grew up in an Alberta that Peter Lougheed created in the 1970s where that was the kind of conversation, open public policy that we had. I want to get back to the Alberta and the Canada where we talk openly about public policy, we have clearly articulated goals, we agree that we need to do this, and then we figure out how to do it in the best possible way for the most people and for the environment. That's how adults would behave. That's why I want to be involved in politics and make our country great and open-minded again.
You'll hear the Conservative candidate say that her government that she would like to join is a defender of sustainable and responsible energy development. And that's incredibly easy to say if you have never defined what you mean by sustainable, if you've never really explored what you mean by responsible, if in fact all you've done is cheerlead. And you cheerleaded in one direction, let's get to the U.S., let's expand that market there, the Gulf Coast has excess refining capacity, go, 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 go. And now we're hearing that just maybe that might not be the best direction. So now we're saying, oh, we got to go to China. We've got to attach ourselves to a single other enormous government, even more distant and detached from decision-making that we make, and go, 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 go in that direction, and presume that China, by 5 or 10 or 20 years out, also still needs what we think they need today. That is not sustainable, responsible resource development. What we need to be doing is having a real conversation about our energy future. We need to begin with the understanding that we are going to need fossil fuel resources for the foreseeable future and that they need to be developed in a responsible manner. And we need all the stakeholders on the table, all the provinces, First Nations, the federal government, and the industry itself and its critics, and we need to get everyone back to a common conversation, and then we can begin to decide which directions are most important to be moving in now, which ones we should be holding off until later, and all of those sorts of decisions. But in the present regulatory vacuum, there's really no consistent decision-making made on any of this stuff. And this is why I think there's such a unique opportunity in this by-election. A Green MP from Calgary would be absolutely unique in Canada's history, for one thing, but certainly in this conversation about our energy future. I would be able to speak to both the industry and its critics, because I already have. In my books, in speeches that I've given since those books came out, I've been invited into rooms, everywhere from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers to the Friends of Fish Creek Park, to Green Calgary, to the Calgary Real Estate Board, to talk about these things. And I know we have common values around this, and we have common interests around this, and I really think I can change that conversation so that we aren't just making up numbers and spitting them out about what a carbon tax might cause, but we could actually say, well, one thing we know we're going to need long term is a price on carbon. Let's figure out how to get there, and let's move to a more diversified energy economy that can't be shut down every single time the biggest trading partner changes its mind. That's not sustainable and responsible resource development when one decision or one new technological development in your one biggest customer can completely change the market. That's not sustainable. That's not leadership. That's why we need a new voice, particularly on energy in Ottawa right now, and that's why I think we need to send a Green MP to Ottawa.
There seems to be a bit of a myth being perpetuated here that the Conservative government is not interested in the environment. And that's the fiction that the opposition would like to spin. In fact, this Conservative government has made some really major investments in clean air specifically. They've instituted a $40 million fund for climate change and clean air projects. There's $100 million that's gone into clean energy technology, and there's $1 billion that's gone into clean energy research and development. Now, on top of that, in 2014, we're proposing measures that are going to require high emissions targets, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions for commercial vehicles, trucks, and for buses. So these are things that are coming and that are in place right now that the Conservative government has been doing to improve our air quality and our environment. And I just wanted to address Harvey Locke talking about opening up markets to Asia. Harvey might want to have a little discussion with his leader, whoever the leader might be right now. We know it's sort of Bob Ray, but it's a bit of a reality contest to see who's going to be the head of the leaderless Liberal Party. But the Liberals have a policy of banning West Coast tanker traffic, which would landlock Alberta's oil sands and prevent our access to the Asian and Indian markets, where you're right, we would get world prices for our oil. So first to that, and then just second to Chris Turner talking about sustainable and responsible energy development. I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what that means, because this is something that I think that I can help Calgary with. We do need to get the message out that we can and are developing our industry in a sustainable way. So the Curl Oil Sands plant that Imperial Oil will be opening right away in Fort McMurray is going to have the same greenhouse gas emission level per barrel of oil that a conventional refinery in the U.S. will have. So this is going to be news to a lot of people who think that the oil sands are, generating great amounts of pollutants. It will have the same greenhouse gas emission as a conventional refinery. And yes, it is the first one that's coming on stream that has that level, but that's where technology is going. Technology is actually, and innovation are actually what we're on the forefront of in the environmental field, and that's what's coming on the forefront of how we're developing this. Tailings ponds used to take 17 years to reclaim. Then they had it down to 2 years. Now it's a matter of months. Pipelines are the absolute top of the line way to transport bitumen, natural gas, and in fact, if we put pipelines to the West Coast and are able to send LNG to China, we're going to enable China to get off coal-fired power 20 to 30 years before before they will if we don't help in that effort, because they're building one new coal-fired power plant per week right now. So one of the best things that we could do for the world global environmental picture is actually get our exports going to China. So these are some of the things that's part of the story that we need to tell about how our energy industry is contributing to a more sustainable world.
Hearing a conservative candidate proud of their environmental record is interesting, isn't it? Especially when we think that Canadian foreign policy has become getting awards, like fossil awards, and being made fun of on the international stage because of the lack of action from the Conservative government. The question is about the Northern Gateway Pipeline. And I've heard Harvey speak about this now. This is the fourth forum, and I'm still not sure if you're for or against. I want to be very clear. The NDP has said clearly we are against the Northern Gateway Pipeline. Here's why. Super tankers pulling U-turns in the Douglas Strait will end in tragedy. Will end in tragedy if we're not sure. Let's think about the Exxon Valdez disaster that's still decades later impacting ecosystems. There's another reason that the Northern Gateway Pipeline doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's because a west to east pipeline makes a lot of sense. You know that Canada, right now the oil sands produces about 2 million barrels of oil a day. Right now, Canada burns about 2 million barrels of oil a day. But under the Northern Gateway proposal, Eastern Canada is shipping oil from Saudi Arabia to Quebec, and Western Canada is shipping oil from British Columbia to China. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, does it? Whereas a west to east pipeline would allow Canada to be truly energy self-sufficient, wouldn't damage natural resources. There's no way to get to the Pacific without going through BC. You just can't do it. BC said very clearly, we don't want to play. And so the Northern Gateway is a non-starter. We cannot buy the rhetoric about the Conservative government's environmental record. We cannot. If we're unsure, just watch international news. The world knows the answer to this question. The world knows how regressive the Conservative environmental policy has been. And right here in Canada, we also know that the NDP has been the party on environmental issues that has had the biggest impact. And as the official opposition right now, we have the biggest chance to holding the Harper government to account on stripping the environmental regulations that they continue to do. Thank you.
Some of the questions that you had may have been answered, may not, in the responses of the candidates.
Well, thanks very much. It's been interesting. And this has been an important event to air the views of a number of candidates so that you can help to make your decision on November the 26th. The opposition parties would like us to believe differently, but this election is about one thing, and that is about the economy. And it's about how to keep our economy moving in Alberta. And in order to keep our economy moving in Alberta, we need to make sure that we stay away from the $20 billion carbon tax, the uncosted promises that the opposition are presenting here today. Those are things that would damage our economy and would damage our quality of life. So you have a very clear choice. You can go for higher carbon taxes and uncosted policies, for higher other kinds of taxes that will affect everything from the groceries you buy to the gas you put in your car, or you can go for a strong conservative candidate that will support your continued economic growth and your quality of life. And that's me. I'm going to be a strong defender of low taxes for Calgarians and for all Canadians, for our families, and yes, for the development of our sustainable natural resource sector, for responsible development of that. The Prime Minister and the Conservatives have a proven track record on this. We have the best economy in the G7, and that is no mean feat. That's because yesterday it was the Economic Action Plan, today it's the Economic Action Plan, tomorrow it's the Economic Action Plan, because you know what? That improves your quality of life, that puts money in your pockets, and that's what enables us to pay for our important social programs. So I'm just going to close on a personal note.
which is why I believe that I'm the best candidate for you in Calgary Centre. And that is because I'm your neighbor. I live in this riding, and I have for 17 years. I've raised my children here. They've gone to schools here. I've volunteered for the charities that you volunteered. And I've supported the arts and culture that really keeps this riding vibrant. And it's a very important part of the diverse nature of this riding. I've also covered the issues that matter to Calgarians day in and day out as the managing editor of the Calgary Herald. And you know what? For the last 10 years, I've been standing up for you, whether you knew it or not, on national television virtually every day on every major network in the country. I will stand up for you in Ottawa. I have been standing up for you every day. I will stand up for you in Ottawa. I've knocked on 10,000 of your doors so far in this riding. I hope to knock on a lot more in the next while. And I'm asking you humbly for your vote on November 26th to keep our economy strong and keep a strong representative in the government in Ottawa. Thank you very much.
We are more than the economy. Gosh, it hurts me to have to say it, doesn't it? The reductionist view of this conservative government to suggest that any of us in this community consider ourselves to be only an economic actor is absurd. It is, in fact, insulting. It is insulting as well to stand up and say, this is only about the economy, when we care more and equally about the economic situation in our country, the environmental situation in our country, and the social situation in our country. You know, there is this notion that the Conservatives are somehow the saviors of our economy. I don't buy it. I don't buy it, if only because it isn't true. You know, Jim Flaherty came out with a report yesterday that drastically changed the economic outlook for Canada. I'm surprised Joan didn't bring it up, because she talked about economic numbers that came far before those ones. But we are, of course, need to keep in mind the environmental debt that is being passed on to our children and our grandchildren by a government that says openly that everything is just about the economy. So we can't be surprised with the environmental debt, and we can't be surprised with the social debt either. 3.2 Canadians living in poverty. That social debt is what the result is of a party that says openly, we are nothing but economic actors. This election is about one thing, only the economy. Of course it isn't about only the economy. Because as people, we're not about only the economy. Right now, the NDP is the official opposition. We are the most likely party to beat the Conservatives in 2015. But this by-election isn't even about that. This by-election is sending a message to Stephen Harper from his own backyard. You can't tell us mistruths all the time. You can't hide information in 400-page bills. You can't put out press releases at midnight on a Friday night. You can't make up numbers like $30 billion carbon tax. You must tell us the truth. And the best way to show Stephen Harper that is by sending a member of the official opposition right from his backyard and rejecting the conservative notion that we as people are nothing but our wallets. Thank you.
First of all, thank you all for coming here today, sitting patiently. Really, I think a great show of Calgary Centre's belief and thirst and desire for democracy that you're all willing to come today. So thank you all for that. You know, an interesting thing happens when you decide to become the Green Party candidate in Calgary Centre. You tell people, I'm running for the Greens in Calgary Centre, and they say, really? No way. Running for the Greens in Calgary Centre? No way. You started out 37 points behind the Conservative, and now you're 9 back? No way. Woo! campaign staff can't keep lawn signs in the office? No way. We have 150 volunteers across the city right now delivering direct mailers because we decided that was the easiest way to do it. Joan Crockatt stood here today, and one of the first things she said to you is Calgary's future is under attack. No way. Calgary's future has never been brighter. The energy in this city has never been more powerful. That's why my campaign is attracting the kind of energy that it is, the kind of dedicated staff, the amazing army of volunteers. That's why when our phone canvassers call, we're hearing these excited voices more and more each day. Wow, this campaign, this is something. What a message. This is amazing. The reason why is because we know you all are ready for this. We know this is Calgary's moment. We know we can lead. We can be the great urban idea lab of the 21st century. Toronto, Montreal, a bunch of eastern cities taught us what a 20th century city looked like. Calgary is going to teach us what a 21st century city looks like. We don't need a government in Ottawa with no imagination and no vision. We need a government in Ottawa that recognizes that sustainability is more than a buzzword. It is a way of being and a way of operating in the world. It's the bottom line for the 21st century, and Calgary can lead on that as well. What we need is a partner in Ottawa that gives us the tools we need, we know the city needs as it grows. That's what we really need. We've already got the ideas. What we need is a real partner and a real voice, not another backbencher. You know, one of the numbers that Joan Crockatt mentioned, this is an amazing thing when you talk about what sustainability means. She bragged that the federal government spent $40 million on climate change this year. Did I get that number right? $40 million? That means we've got a government in Ottawa that treats climate change as a problem about on par with advertising our success in the War of 1812. Is that preparing Canada for the 21st century to treat climate change like it's about as important as a war that happened 200 years ago? No, we need real leadership. We need a real voice. We don't need another cheerleader on the energy front. We actually need to rejoin the conversation, retake the lead. Where else but Calgary could we solve the sustainable energy crisis of the 21st century? Who knows energy better than us? Who can do it better than us? We've got the knowledge here. I know we have the talent. I've been meeting people all over the city, entrepreneurs, people in oil and gas, all kinds of folks involved in the energy business, just waiting for a partner in Ottawa that will let them lead, that will let them show the world that Calgary is ready to be not just an oil capital, but a true energy capital for the 21st century. And here's what I'd like to leave you with today. On November 26th, you go and vote. On November 27th, the government of Canada will still be Conservative government. The official opposition will still be NDP, and the Liberals will have 35 or 36 seats in the House, one or the other. But the option before you is that you could have the second Green MP in Canadian history from Calgary Centre. Think what a story that is. Doesn't that tie into an energy that we've already built here? Doesn't that say, hey, take a look at us much more closely. There's a lot more to Calgary than meets the eye. This is a much more interesting and diverse and exciting city than you think it is. And we are open to all conversations and ready to lead. That's the question I think we need to ask ourselves on November 26th. Do we want more of the same, or do we want something that has never happened before? Let's make history on November 26th. Let's elect a Green MP.
This is a very special time in the life of our city. You're good at that. This is a very special time in the life of our city. If you're following this election closely, you would know that Joan and I are tied dead even in the polls. Dead even. This is your time to decide whether this Conservative government has been so perfect, so exceptional in every way, so worthy of your undivided support, that you must send another one to Ottawa without any political diversity representing our city of 1.2 million people. Or whether you share my values of being fiscally prudent, socially progressive, and environmentally responsible at home and abroad, whether you think Calgary has another point of view than that of Stephen Harper, whether you think that we ought to step up and have dreams of an integrated world in which we take things into account together, where we don't describe ourselves solely by reference to money. Whether you think that our city ought to have great dreams and aspirations beyond being an energy capital, but rather a place for people to come, build, and want to stay, not a place to come and cash in and leave. Whether you think Canada is worth fighting for in the next election, or whether you're satisfied that just decrying what's going on is good enough, or whether you think you ought to have a government that would like to have scientists on staff so that we can research things and make fact-based decisions, whether you think you want a government that will invest in culture, whether you think you want a government that will give Calgary a fair share of payments for infrastructure and things like that instead of take us like a cash cow, will just blindly vote Conservative forever, whether you think in 2012 our city is a great city that wants to take a seat at the head table of Canada, build a viable political alternative for the next election so that we can get the people who are causing the problem out and replace it with a renewed group of people who will dream in an integrated way about what Canada should be in the world in the 21st century. Please join me in doing that. This is a horse race to the finish. Joan or I are going to win this thing. I implore you, join us. Say something new about Calgary to the country. Please vote for me in this upcoming election. Thank you for listening today. Good night.
Well, I just have a few thank yous. We will wrap up just a little bit early, but that's better to be early than late, right? I'd like to extend appreciation and thank yous to the organizers and the attended volunteers for their dedicated energy and self-service.